We recently completed a survey in the Bay Area of California. It was an old parcel. In other words, it was created a long time ago, and it was created out of an even older subdivision map. And when I say old, I mean old. Like for West Coast, it was old. It was before the 1900s. So, it wasn't quite Gold Rush era, but pretty close. It was a late 1800s subdivision map. And there were no filed surveys of the parcel. There weren't even any filed surveys in the block. So this property had been carved up over the last 150 years, and there wasn't a lot of monuments in the ground. There were very few filed surveys, and so the client was a business, was a construction company, had bought this vacant parcel in the Bay Area, and they were going to put a new shop on it, and they knew enough to go out and make some rough tape measures, take some rough measurements with a tape measure. And they realized that when they were measuring between walls and fences and buildings, that things didn't match what was on the tax assessor map. And so they got a little bit concerned, and they gave me a call, and they said, hey, here's the situation. We're a little concerned. We're pulling a tape measure, and we don't have as much land as we thought we did based on the tax assessor map. What do you think we should do? And so I talked to him, and I said, look, I really think you should get a boundary survey. I said, it's not going to be cheap. We're based on where you're at. It's going to be expensive. It's quite a bit of work for me. But I said, I strongly recommend that you do that before you go much farther in this process. And the guy said, okay, great. Yeah, I want to hire you to do the survey. He says, when can you get out here? I said, well, I think I can get out in about a week. He's like, oh man, I can't have you out here any later than that. He said, I've got a building showing up in a few days. I said, what do you mean you have a building showing up? He says, I've got a prefabricated steel building coming to the site. We're getting ready to erect the steel. I said, wow. I said, did you work with an architect or an engineer to get the building design? They're like, oh yeah, we have an architect, we got a structural civil engineer, we got a civil engineer. I said, okay, great. I said, did any of those design professionals recommend that you get a survey? He said, nope, nobody ever talked to me about a survey. The only reason I called you is because I got my tape measurement out and some things weren't fitting, and I got a little concerned. I was like, all right, well, we definitely got to get a survey done. And I told the guy, I said, look, there is a really good chance based on where you're at and the age of the surveys out here that I'm going to get out and find out that you don't have what's shown on the tax assessor map. You might have a little more, you might have a little less. He's like, well, what do you think the chances are of that? I said, pretty good. The chances are pretty good that I'm not going to get exactly what you think you have. He said, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it now. Let's get the survey and figure out what we're dealing with. So I went ahead and did the survey. We were out there for a couple days, did a lot of work, surveyed the whole block, right? Spent a lot of time putting together the boundary resolution, came up with a line that I was very confident in. And so I delivered the drawing. We delivered some drawings to the client, and I said, hey, get these over to your design team, your architect, your structural, your civil, so they can take a look and see what kind of impact this is going to have. So a few days later, I get a call from the client, and he says, my structural engineer said that your boundary surveyor doesn't fit his building. Your boundary survey doesn't fit his building. And I kind of chuckled a little bit, and I said, oh, is that what he said? He said, yeah. He said, your boundary survey is too small, and now the building won't fit. I said, well, yeah, I was worried something like that might happen. I said, you remember I told you that? He's like, yeah, I remember. He said, I don't understand what's going to happen now. He says, what if my building doesn't fit? I said, well, you're going to have some problems if your building doesn't fit. I said, you're going to have to redesign your building. He's like, well, the building's already been fabricated. It's on its way to the site. I was like, yeah, that's a major issue. I said, you're going to have to meet with your design team, and you're going to have to figure out what your options are. He says, I'm really confused. He says, I feel like I went about this backwards. He said, I feel like I should have got the survey before my architect and my structural engineer designed the building. I said, you're absolutely right. This got done backwards. I said, absolutely, you should have got the survey before the engineer and the architect designed the building. He said, well, I don't understand why they didn't tell me that. I said, I don't understand why they didn't tell you that either. He's like, all right. He says, well, I appreciate you, working with me. And he said, I'll let you know, what we find out. And I told him, I said, look, I'm going to do whatever I can to work with you, and you probably, you're going to need me. You're going to need some help from me. I'm going to have to stake your forms when they figure out where this building's going. And, this is going to be a super tight fit. We want to make sure that the building gets put in the right place. I said, so I'll work with you guys and we'll make sure that gets done. And so he said, yep, I appreciate it. He was super good client. He said, I understand this isn't your fault. He said, and I'm glad I got the survey and I know what's going on. He said, I didn't want to find out after I put up the building. So it's a really sad story, right? And I think we're going to be able to work this out. He's going to be able to get his building up, but you know, it's not going to be as easy as he thought, and there's going to be some hiccups and some extra costs. So what are the lessons? Well, I want to talk to design professionals first. So if you're an architect or a structural engineer or a civil engineer, don't do design in urban settings without a good boundary survey. You know, in this case, the structural engineer and the architect used some dimensions on a tax assessor plat, and those dimensions were wrong. Tax assessor maps are cartoons for tax assessment purposes. They are not surveys, and they're not the result of surveys in almost every case. In my opinion, if you're a structural engineer or an architect or a civil engineer and you do design on a compact urban site without a boundary survey, you are being negligent, and that exposes you to liability, and if it costs your client a bunch of money, you should probably be sued for that. So don't do it. It's negligent practice. So that's the lesson for design professionals. What's the lesson for clients? So if you're the builder or the owner or the real estate investor, hire a good design team. Make sure that design team includes a good land surveyor and private land use planner. Do not let your design team do design work on a compact urban site without the involvement of a land surveyor. Boundary surveyors are not cheap. Boundary surveyors are not cheap. There is a cost to them, but that cost is often greatly dwarfed by the cost of redesign or, heaven forbid, changes that come up during construction because your design team didn't have a good survey foundation for their design. So get a good design team, hold that design team accountable. The other lesson is, you know, you need to ask your design team, who's managing this project? Because here's what happens. The architect's only worried about their piece, the structural engineer's only worried about their piece, the civil engineer is only worried about their piece, and nobody's taking a comprehensive look at the overall project, making sure that those design professionals work together properly, making sure that there's no gaps that aren't being covered, right? And in this case, I had to step in as the land surveyor after the design was finished and kind of take on that role as a project manager. In fact, that client called me back and said, hey, are there any other things that you can think of that my engineer and architect may have goofed up? I want to try and identify those issues right now before I start putting up this building. And so him and I had a short conversation about that. I gave him a couple other things to check just based on my past project experience. But, you know, somebody should be doing that for you. And usually it's the architect. If the architect's not going to do that, you need to know. The architect needs to tell you, I am not going to be your project manager. And then you need to figure out, well, then if the architect isn't going to do it, who is going to do it? And you need somebody that can help you hold those design professionals accountable, especially when you're trying to build on an infill parcel, you know, in a compact urban environment where, you know, that much space really matters and can really make a difference.